So there's so many ways of remembering. I think there's a way that we remember collectively, which is all together, and the way we could say society remembers events. It's sort of what we kind of agree all together happened. It's a bit like how in your family, there might be stories that get told so much you feel you remember them, even though the events in the story might have happened before you were born or when you were really, really little. That's sort of the collective memory of what happened in your family. And eventually the pandemic will be over. And we will have a collective memory about what has happened during COVID-19. And that's why I think this project you're doing for school is so cool, because you're gonna help us remember that the diaries you're producing and the pictures you're producing and the things you're thinking are gonna be part of that big collective memory. In a more personal sense or private sense, as you're saying, Debbie, there's no one way to remember. Everyone is able to remember in their own way and in their own time. And so I can give some suggestions, but I don't have a recipe for the best or the only way to remember. But I think things that are helpful to think about are for people who have died or been sick, it's important or useful often to remember what they liked to do, the people they loved, the funny things they said, how many pets they had, to remember their lives and who they were to the people that loved them, rather than the circumstances of their death, which is COVID-19. It's often really useful to focus on the person who has died's life. It's also, I think, useful to think about remembering in a variety of ways, right? So for ourselves, we might talk to our friends and family, we might look at pictures, we might make videos, we might draw pictures. When it's safe, we might go to a place that is important and meaningful to us to just think about the pandemic and sort of take stock of everything that has happened and to be quiet and reflect. For people who belong to faith communities, going to places of worship like a church or temple or gurdwara or mosque or synagogue can often be a good place to remember. But there are as many ways as you can think of. There are ways to remember. There is not a wrong way.
And do you think, I mean, obviously we're talking about, thinking about a national remembrance of some kind of like Remembrance Sunday.
Yeah.
Which happens on 11th of November, and we wear poppies and we put wreaths on monuments and that kind of thing. And obviously we talked a little bit in the last term about the influenza epidemic and how there's no memorial.
Yeah.
And even if the government put up a memorial, that, I mean, it doesn't have to be a fancy or permanent memorial, does it? I mean, everybody remembers in their own way. So, I mean, what do you want to finish with, just to say to the group today?
I think one of the key things to keep in mind about remembrance and memorialization is that it doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to be a statue. It doesn't have to be a plaque. Those things are nice, but they're not the only way to remember. We don't need to ask permission for remembrance. The government is not the only institution or place in our lives that engages in remembrance. All remembrance matters. And so if you want to memorialize the pandemic or a person who died within your family or your community or your school, you can do that. And that is just as important as the types of fancy remembrance we might be a little more familiar with. Everyone is allowed to participate in remembering.
Thank you. Thanks very much for sharing that information and your research with us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. This has been a real pleasure.